"You can't keep him," Tessic said. Darog Combe set the water bucket down, straightened his back with the slow caution of a man whose spine had been filing complaints since age 50, and looked at the conquered relocation officer standing at the edge of his wheat field. Tessic was Vorathi, 7 feet of pale green scaling, compound eyes the color of wet slate, dressed in a transit uniform that fit the way uniforms always fit on beings not built for the cut. He held a clipboard. He held it the way every bureaucrat in the galaxy held a clipboard, like it was the last honest object in the world. "I heard you the first time," Darog said. He picked up the bucket and walked toward the barn. Behind him, the Border Collie was lying in the shade of the grain silo, watching the conversation with the specific focused calm of an animal that had decided the stranger was not a threat, but also not welcome. Its name was Moss. It was 9 years old. It had one brown eye and one blue, a torn left ear that had healed badly after a fence wire incident when it was 3, and a coat the color of coal dust shot through with silver where age had started its quiet audit. It did not move when Tessic followed Darog toward the barn. It watched. The farm was called Comb's Rest, though nobody had called it that in decades. It sat on a plateau on the daylight side of Murath 4, a conquered administered colony world that had been classified as a marginal agricultural zone when the first surveyors mapped it 60 years ago and had remained marginal ever since. The soil was calcium heavy, the growing season was short, the rainfall was uneven, and the wind came from the east with a regularity that wore paint off buildings and patience off people. 42 families had settled the plateau in the first wave. 11 remained. Darog was one of the 11. He grew wheat, a strain his grandfather had gene-adapted for the calcium content, and he grew it stubbornly, the way a man grows something when the alternative is admitting that the land won. Tessic caught up to him at the barn door. "Mr. Combe, the relocation order is not optional. The Conquered has classified the Murath 4 plateau as a seismically unstable zone. You have 14 days to relocate to the designated settlement at Varen Basin." "I know about the order." "Then you understand that all livestock, equipment, and personal effects will be transported by Conquered shuttle at no cost to you." However, Tessic paused. The pause was the shape of the word however, which in Darog's experience was the shape of whatever bad news actually mattered. Companion animals from Class 12 deathworlds require separate processing. The Border Collie will need to be transferred to a licensed xenofauna holding facility for the duration of the transition. Standard quarantine. 14 to 21 days. Darog set the bucket inside the barn door and turned around. He was 63 years old. He had a face like a topographic map of difficult terrain, weathered, creased, sun-darkened in a way that never quite faded even during the short winters. His hands were the hands of a man who had spent 40 years pulling things out of dirt. He wore the same canvas jacket he had worn for the last 8 years, patched at the elbows with a thread that did not match, and boots that had been resoled twice. He looked at Tessic the way he looked at the east wind, with the calm, fixed expression of a man who had heard the argument before and had not been convinced. "No," he said. Tessic's compound eyes shifted, the Vorathi equivalent of a blink. "Mr. Combe, the dog stays with me. The regulation is clear. Class 12 organisms in transit must be processed through. The dog stays with me, son. That's the end of it." There was a silence, the kind of silence that happens when a bureaucratic system meets a man who has decided that the system does not apply to him, and who has the particular, quiet stubbornness of someone who has outlasted weather and debt and loneliness, and a plateau that has been trying to kill his wheat for 4 decades. Tessic looked at his clipboard. Darog looked at the east wind coming across the field. Moss, in the shade of the silo, looked at both of them and did not move. 14 days, that was what the order said. 14 days until the Conquered shuttles arrived, loaded what was left of the plateau's families, and flew them to Varen Basin, a prefabricated settlement 200 kilometers south where the ground did not shake, and the soil was better, and the wind was probably gentler, and everything was probably fine, and none of it was his. Darug picked up his bucket and went inside the barn. Day 13. The morning started the way mornings started on the plateau. Wind from the east, pale light through the kitchen window, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed from a grudge. Darug sat at the table with a mug in one hand and a manifest in the other. The manifest was the Concord's relocation inventory form, 12 pages of itemized fields covering every object, organism, and structure on his property. He had filled in 11 pages over the past week, documenting in careful handwriting everything he owned. The harvester, the seed drills, the irrigation pumps, the generator, the 400 meters of fencing he had replaced twice, the furniture his wife had chosen and he had never changed, the kitchen table where he was sitting, which his grandfather had built from wood hauled from the lowland forests before the colony's lumber trade collapsed. He had filled in 11 pages. The 12th page was the companion animal section, and it was blank. Moss was under the table, which was where Moss always was during breakfast. Not because Darug fed him from the table, he did not, and the dog knew better than to expect it, but because the kitchen table was where Darug was, and where Darug was, Moss was. This had been the arrangement for 9 years. It was not negotiable. Moss had his chin resting on the floor between his forepaws, his body curled into the controlled comma shape that Border Collies adopt when they are resting but not sleeping, their muscles loosened but their awareness still tracking every sound, every shift in air pressure, every creak of wood and hum of wind that the house made around them. Outside, 3 other plateau families were packing. He could see the shuttle containers stacked in the Morrill yard half a kilometer east, bright orange against the dun soil. The Kesslers had left 2 days ago, their house already taking on the particular blankness of an abandoned structure, windows reflecting sky instead of life. The Vaughn family had gone last week. One by one, the plateau was emptying, the way a room empties when the lights go out, not all at once, but in the slow, inevitable thinning of people who had each, privately, decided that the argument was over. Darug had not decided that. He looked at the blank page. He looked at Moss under the table. Moss looked back at him with the steady, patient expression that Border Collies carry like a second coat, the expression that says, "I am here. I have always been here. I will be here when you finish whatever you are doing." It was not pleading. Border Collies did not plead. They assessed, they waited, they adjusted. They watched the world the way a good farmer watches a field, with attention that never switched off. "We'll figure it out," Darug said. Moss put his chin on Darug's boot. The comm unit on the wall chimed. Darug ignored it. It chimed again. He ignored it again. On the 3rd chime, Moss lifted his head and looked at the unit, then looked at Darug, and the look was the kind of look that did not require translation. Darug sighed and answered. "Mr. Combe, this is Tessic, Concord Relocation Division. I'm calling to confirm your departure schedule for tomorrow morning. The seismic monitoring team has updated the plateau assessment, and I have been asked to emphasize that the timeline is firm. I'll be ready. And the companion animal processing. I have not received the transfer authorization for your. Told you, the dog stays with me. Mr. Combe, I have explained the regulatory framework. The Xenofauna holding facility at Varon Basin is equipped to handle Class 12 organisms with full environmental simulation, nutritional programming, and behavioral monitoring. Your animal will be. I'm sure it's equipped to do all sorts of things. The dog stays with me." A pause. "I will note your position in the file." "You do that." Darug hung up. He looked at Moss. "They want to put you in a box for 3 weeks. Moss's tail moved once, a slow sweep across the kitchen floor that collected a small constellation of dust and silver-black fur. "Over my dead body," Darug said, and went outside to finish packing. The wheat field was still standing. 40 hectares of gene-adapted winter wheat, golden brown and heavy-headed, and ready for a harvest that would never come. The stalks moved in the east wind with the particular undulating rhythm that wheat develops when it is fully ripe, a slow roll from one side of the field to the other, like a sea made of grain. The seismic survey had flagged the plateau's substrate as Category 3, active fault migration, probability of surface rupture within 18 months, and the Concord had issued the evacuation order with the kind of bureaucratic finality that left no room for a man who thought he knew his own land better than a sensor array. Darragh walked the field perimeter the way he walked it every morning, Moss at his left heel, matching his pace with the unconscious precision of an animal that had been doing this since it could walk. The Border Collie's gait was a specific thing, a controlled trot that covered ground without wasted motion, paws landing in a straight line the way the breed manual said they should, and it adjusted automatically to Darragh's speed, his turns, his pauses. When Darragh stopped to check a stalk, bending to pinch the husk between thumb and forefinger and feeling the grain's hardness, Moss stopped. When Darragh moved, Moss moved. It was not obedience. It was something deeper than obedience, a synchronization that had been built over 9 years of mornings exactly like this one, each step calibrated against the last, until the two of them moved through the field like a single organism with two bodies and one purpose. At the field's eastern edge, where the plateau dropped away toward the lower basin in a ragged escarpment of calcium-white stone, Darragh could see the Concord staging area. A cluster of prefab structures with Concord insignia, shuttle pads marked with orange safety paint, cargo containers in various stages of loading, and the particular organized chaos of a relocation operation in its final phase. There were Vorathi officers in transit uniforms moving between structures with data pads. Toreshi cargo handlers, their massive frames and four-armed builds loading equipment containers onto flatbed transports, with a rhythm that suggested they had done this 100 times on 100 different worlds. A Kalsarathi engineer, nearly 3 meters tall, was calibrating a shuttle's docking clamp with hands that could crush stone but moved with surgical precision. And there, at the edge of the staging area, a structure Darragh had been trying not to look at for the past week, the Xenofauna holding facility. It was low, windowless, climate-controlled, and clean. It looked exactly like what it was, a place designed to contain animals safely and efficiently, with no consideration for whether the animal inside it might object to being contained. Moss sat beside him at the edge and looked at the facility. His ears were forward, his eyes steady, his body in the controlled stillness of a herding dog that has identified something in the landscape and is deciding what it means. He did not whine. Border Collies did not whine about things they could not change. They simply noted the landscape and waited for their handler to decide what to do about it. "Not happening," Darragh said. Moss's tail swept once across the dirt, agreement or patience. With Moss, they were often the same thing. Day 12. Tessic arrived in person, which was the first sign that the bureaucracy had escalated. He brought a colleague, a Drenathi named Paulith, compact and silver-furred, with the precise movements and oversized pupils of a species evolved on a dim-lit world. Paulith was a Xenofauna compliance specialist, which was a title that meant she traveled to places where Earth animals had caused administrative problems and determined whether the problems were the animal's fault or the paperwork's. She carried a scanner, a document folder sealed with a Concord compliance stamp, and the expression of someone who had been sent to solve a problem that should not have been a problem. They found Darragh in the barn, repairing a harness he would never use again, because the alternative was sitting in the kitchen looking at a blank form. The barn smelled the way it always smelled: old wood, machine oil, grain dust. The harness was leather, hand-stitched by a saddler who had moved to the lowlands 20 years ago. Darragh worked the needle through the cracked leather with the focus of a man who is not thinking about the harness. Moss was lying across the barn's threshold, half in sun, half in shadow, occupying the doorway with the particular talent Border Collies have for positioning themselves exactly where traffic needs to flow. His front paws were crossed, his body was relaxed, and his mismatched eyes tracked the approaching visitors with the quiet intensity of an air traffic controller watching two unscheduled arrivals. Paulette stopped 3 meters from the dog. She raised her scanner and swept it across moss. Darug watched her eyes widen, the pupils dilating in the Drenathi way that meant the data was not matching expectations. Her silver fur rose along her forearms, an involuntary Drenathi response to stimuli that fell outside trained categories. "This animal," she said, her voice careful and clinical. "It is a Border Collie, Earth Canny's Lupus familiaris herding variant." "That's right. Mass 22 kilograms. But the scanner is reading." She paused, cycled the display, read it again. "The biomechanical density is significantly above galactic median for an organism this size. Skeletal reinforcement consistent with high-gravity evolutionary adaptation. Cardiovascular efficiency rated at—" She stopped again and looked at the scanner as though it had said something rude. "Mr. Combe, this animal's endurance profile exceeds that of a Keth long-range pursuit predator. By a considerable margin." "He can run all day," Darug said. "Always could. Ran my flock down from the high terraces once, 8 kilometers, didn't stop until every animal was in the pen. Then he drank a bowl of water and lay down and went to sleep." "And the neurological readings?" Paulette looked up from the scanner, and something in her expression had changed. The clinical distance had narrowed. "I am seeing cognitive activity patterns that Mr. Combe. This animal is processing environmental information at a rate I associate with tactical assessment. It is watching me. It has been watching me since I arrived. It tracked my approach vector. It noted the scanner when I raised it, and it shifted its body weight to block the doorway more completely when I moved to the left. It did this without standing up. It redistributed mass through its hind legs to close the gap. That's what he does. He's a herding dog. He watches things. He is not merely watching. He is anticipating. He predicted my lateral movement and preposition to control my access to the barn. This is not a pet behavior, Mr. Combe. This is a working intelligence." Tessick stepped forward, clipboard angled for emphasis. "Mr. Combe, this is precisely why the regulation exists. A Class 12 organism with this level of cognitive and physical capability cannot be transported in a standard passenger shuttle without proper containment protocols. The risk assessment." "What risk?" Darug set down the harness and the needle. "That dog has been with me for 9 years. He's herded my flock, slept on my floor, ridden in my truck across every road on this plateau. He's been around Toreshi, Vorathi, Kalsarathi. Every species that works the trade routes through here. The Moro kids used to climb on him. Old Mrs. Vaughn's Crescent Service lizard used to sleep next to him by the fire pit. Never once, not once, has he so much as growled at anyone. The regulation does not assess past behavior, Mr. Combe. It assesses capability." "Then your regulation doesn't know him." Paulette was still scanning. She had moved closer, not deliberately, Darug noticed, but in the incremental way that people move toward things that interest them without realizing their feet are carrying them. Moss had not moved. His ears were forward, his eyes tracking Paulette's scanner hand with the patient focus of an animal that has all the time in the world. When she crouched to get a lower angle reading on his skeletal structure, his tail moved. One sweep. Slow and measured, the way a clock hand moves. "The behavioral profile," Paulette said quietly, more to herself than to either of them. "The calm, the positional awareness, the controlled energy expenditure. It is using only what it needs, conserving everything else. A Keth war lizard at rest still burns 40% of its metabolic capacity on alert state maintenance. This animal is burning less than 8%. She looked at Darug. "Mr. Combe, I need to be honest with you. I have assessed over 400 xenofauna specimens in my career, across 37 species from 11 worlds. I have never seen a predator-class organism this calm in the presence of unfamiliar species." The resting heart rate is remarkable lower than what I record in sedated Keth war lizards. Lower than sedated. He's not a predator-class organism. He's my dog. He is both, Mr. Combe. That is precisely the problem the regulation was written for. Darragh picked up the harness again. The dog stays with me. That's still my answer. Tessic made a note on his clipboard. Paulith stood, looked at her scanner, looked at Moss, and did something Darragh did not expect. She crouched again, this time not with the scanner raised but with her bare hand extended, palm up, fingers loose, the way Darragh had taught visiting neighbors to approach the dog 20 years ago when Mureth 4 mixed species community was still learning that Earth animals were not the things their databases warned about. A slow, low offer. No pressure. No demand. Moss looked at the hand. He looked at Darragh. His mismatched eyes went from one to the other, and in the space between those two looks was a calculation that Darragh had seen 1,000 times, the dog checking the handler before deciding whether the stranger warranted contact. Darragh gave no signal. He did not nod. He did not speak. But his hands were still on the harness, and his shoulders were not tense, and Moss, who had spent 9 years reading Darragh's body with the fluency of a native speaker, read the answer in the way the old man held the leather. Moss leaned forward and touched his nose to Paulith's fingers, a brief, deliberate contact. Then he returned to his position in the doorway, chin on crossed paws, watching. Paulith stood. Her pupils were fully dilated, the silver irises almost invisible around the expanded black. Her fur had risen along her forearms and up to her elbows, the fine silver-gray hairs standing in a soft ridge that caught the afternoon light, and she was breathing through her mouth, which Darragh had never seen a Drenathi do. It was the physical expression of someone who had just been trusted by something that did not need to trust her, and who understood, on a level that the scanner could not measure, what that meant. "I will recommend an exemption review," she said. Her voice had lost its clinical distance. "No promises." She left. Tessic remained for another 30 seconds, clipboard in hand, looking at Moss with the expression of a man who was beginning to suspect that his paperwork was not going to be sufficient for whatever this was. 12 days, Mr. Combe. I can count. Day 10. The first tremor hit at mid-morning. A low, rolling shudder that traveled through the plateau like a slow wave through deep water, the ground lifting and settling in a motion that was almost gentle, almost reassuring, except that Darragh could feel the barn walls flex and hear the grain in the silo shift with a sound like sand through a broken hourglass. The dishes rattled in the kitchen cabinet. The coffee in Darragh's mug sloshed against the rim and left a ring of brown on the manifest's 8th page. Outside, a flock of native broadwings lifted from the tree line in a ragged cloud, their alarm calls sharp against the wind. Moss had known it was coming. 4 minutes before the tremor, while Darragh was reviewing the manifest at the kitchen table, the dog had stood, walked to the door, and pressed his nose against the crack at the base where the threshold met the frame. His ears went flat. His body went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, not the calm of an animal at rest, but the focused rigidity of an animal processing information that had not yet reached the human senses. His breathing slowed. His weight shifted forward onto his front legs. He stayed like that, nose to the crack, absolutely motionless for 4 minutes. Darragh had seen it before. Twice, in the past year, Moss had done this, stood, gone to the door, gone rigid, and both times a minor tremor had followed within minutes. Darragh was not a man given to mysticism or folklore about animals predicting disasters. He did not believe the dog was psychic. He believed the dog could hear frequencies below the threshold of human perception, could feel vibrations through the floor that Darragh's aging joints and work-deafened ears could not detect, and could process those signals into an assessment that amounted to something is wrong with the ground, and it is getting closer. The tremor lasted 8 seconds. Then it was gone, and the plateau was quiet again, and Moss returned to his position under the table with the measured calm of an animal that had filed the event and moved on. He put his chin on Darrog's boot. His breathing returned to normal, his eyes half closed. Darrog's comm chimed within the hour. Tessic. Mr. Combe, the seismic monitoring array recorded a 3.2 magnitude event on the plateau substrate. This is consistent with the Category 3 classification. I trust this reinforces the urgency of the relocation timeline. It was a small one. The survey team's projections indicate escalating frequency and magnitude. The substrate is migrating, Mr. Combe. The fault line is moving northeast, toward your property. I understand the geology, Tessic. Mr. Combe, I must be direct. The remaining families, 7 now, are all proceeding on schedule. You are the only holdout. If you refuse to file the companion animal transfer, I will have no choice but to escalate to the Regional Compliance Authority. They have the legal power to mandate the transfer. Let them try. Mr. Combe. I'll be ready on departure day. Myself, my equipment, and my dog, all 3 together. That's the only way it goes. He hung up. Moss looked at him from under the table, one brown eye visible beneath the table's edge, the blue eye hidden in shadow. Don't give me that look, Darrog said. Moss gave him that look. The look said, I am a Border Collie and I have been giving you this look for 9 years and you have never once changed my mind about anything, but you are welcome to keep trying. Day 8. The Morrow family left. Darrog watched the shuttle lift from their yard, the cargo containers swaying beneath it on magnetic tethers, the house standing empty behind it with its door hanging open, because there was no one left to close it. The wind came through the open windows and moved the curtains that Mrs. Morrow had left hanging, because the shuttle's cargo allotment did not include soft furnishings, and she had decided in that final hour that the curtains belonged to the house more than they belonged to her. That evening, Darrog sat on the porch with Moss at his feet and watched the sun go down over the eastern ridge. The plateau was getting quieter. Each departure subtracted a sound, a door closing, a generator humming, a voice calling across a field, a child laughing, a truck engine turning over in the cold morning, until what remained was the wind and the wheat and the creak of the porch boards under his weight and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the dog. Your mother was a champion, Darrog said to the dog. He did not usually talk to Moss in full sentences. Moss did not require full sentences. A hand signal, a whistle, a single word, sit, away, come by, that'll do. That was the working vocabulary of a farmer and his dog, refined over years into a shorthand so efficient that Darrog sometimes went entire days without speaking aloud except to answer the comm. But the plateau was emptying, and the silence had a weight to it that made a man reach for words the way he might reach for a light switch in a darkening room. Best herding bitch on the colony, won 3 trials before she threw her first litter. Kessler bred her, good man. Patient with animals the way you have to be patient with animals, not the patience of waiting, but the patience of understanding that the animal has its own schedule and your job is to work within it. He took a long pull of coffee. It was cold. He did not care. I picked you because you were the quiet one. All your brothers climbed the fence and your sisters yelled about it. You sat in the corner and watched. Moss's tail moved, a single sweep. Knew right then. I said that one he watches, that's the one I want. Moss put his chin on Darrog's boot. The sun touched the ridge and began its slow collapse behind it, the light flattening and reddening in the particular way that Murath 4 atmosphere processed the sunset, stretching the wavelengths until the sky turned copper, and the shadows turned blue, and the wheat field turned gold, then amber, then the particular shade of burnt bronze that happened for exactly 4 minutes at this time of year, when the light and the grain conspired to make the plateau look like the most beautiful place in the known galaxy. Darrog had seen it 400 times. It had never gotten old. It was going to get old now, because in 6 days he was going to be in Varon Basin looking at prefab walls and standard-issue flooring, and whatever the conquered considered an acceptable view. The calm chimed inside the house. He did not answer it. Day 6. 2 things happened. The first was another tremor, stronger this time, a 4.1 that rattled the barn doors on their hinges, cracked the kitchen window clean across its diagonal, and shook loose a row of preserved grain samples from the shelf above the sink. Moss had given 6 minutes of warning. He had gone to the door, pressed his nose to the floor, and then done something new. He walked to Darragh, pressed his forehead against Darragh's thigh, and stayed there until the tremor passed. Not hiding. Not panicking, not vocalizing. Staying close. The way a partner stays close when the news is bad, and there is nothing to be done about it except to be present. The second thing was Paulith. She arrived without Tessic, which was unexpected. She was carrying her scanner and a sealed document folder, and she had the expression of someone who had spent several days arguing with a system and was not yet sure whether she had won or lost. "Mr. Combe, I submitted the exemption review." And denied. The authority upheld the standard containment protocol. The precedent is ruling 7741 written after a Toreshi war lizard injured 3 handlers during transit. That ruling has been applied to every Class 12 case since, without exception. She paused. Your Border Collie is not a Toreshi war lizard. The ruling does not distinguish. Darragh said nothing. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, mug in hand, the cracked window behind him sealed with a strip of cargo tape that vibrated faintly in the east wind. "However," Paulith said, and the word had a different shape than Tessic's however. It was not the shape of bad news, but the shape of a door that someone had found in a wall that everyone else had assumed was solid. "I have also submitted a secondary filing, an observational waiver, under Provision 12C of the Companion Animal Transit Protocols. It is a provision originally drafted for diplomatic envoys traveling with bonded service animals. The regulation allows for a qualified xenofauna specialist to accompany the animal in lieu of facility containment, provided the specialist maintains continuous behavioral monitoring and assumes full personal and professional liability for any incident." She paused. Her silver fur was smooth. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were dilated. "I have volunteered as the specialist." Darragh looked at her. "Why?" Paulith was quiet for a moment. She looked at Moss, who was lying in his customary position across the kitchen threshold, half sun, half shadow, watching her with the same patient, focused calm. He watched everything. His tail rested on the floorboards. His breathing was even. His one brown eye and one blue eye were fixed on her face with the steady gaze of an animal that has no opinion about bureaucracy, but has a very clear opinion about who is allowed to stand in his doorway. She crouched slowly, the way she had done in the barn 4 days ago, and extended her hand. Moss touched his nose to her fingers. Her fur rose along her arms, and this time Darragh could see that it was not alarm. It was the opposite of alarm. It was the involuntary physical response of someone whose body had decided before her conscious mind could form the words that this contact was safe. "Because in 400 assessments," she said, "I have never encountered an organism that made me reconsider what the word companion means." She stood. "The waiver requires your formal consent and a comprehensive behavioral baseline documented over a minimum of 3 days. I will need to spend the remaining days here, observing. You want to stay on the farm, if you will permit it." Darragh looked at Moss. Moss looked at Darragh. 9 years of mornings in the same field, 9 years of the same walk, the same heel, the same quiet understanding that did not need words and would not have been improved by them. The dog did not nod. The dog did not signal. The dog simply looked at him with one brown eye and one blue, and Darragh knew, in the way that a man who has lived alone with an animal for nearly a decade knows, that the dog had already decided Paulith was acceptable. He had decided it 4 days ago in the barn, when he touched his nose to her hand. Everything since then had been the humans catching up. "There's a spare room," Darog said. "Bed's not much. I have slept on worse." "I doubt that. I once slept in a Keth spawning chamber during a decontamination lockdown. The ambient temperature was 47 degrees, and the pheromone concentration was sufficient to trigger nesting behavior in 3 species. Your spare room will be an improvement." For the first time in 2 weeks, Darog almost smiled. Day 5. Paulith observed. That was the word she used, and it was accurate in the clinical sense, though what she was observing was not clinical. She followed Darog through the morning routine: coffee, manifest review, the blank page still blank, field walk with her scanner running in continuous capture mode, and her eyes recording everything the scanner could not. She watched Moss heal. She watched the dog adjust his stride to Darog's without a command, without a sound, without any visible cue that she could identify: no hand gesture, no shoulder turn, no change in breathing pattern. She watched the dog stop when Darog stopped, turn when Darog turned, check the field's perimeter when Darog's attention drifted to the distant ridge. She watched the dog's ears rotate independently, one tracking a sound from the northwest, a native broadwing calling from the tree line, 300 meters out, the other fixed on Darog's breathing, and she realized that the animal was monitoring 2 environmental inputs simultaneously while maintaining stride calibration with a third. She wrote this down and underlined it. At one point, Darog paused to examine a section of wheat where the stalks had gone pale, a sign of root stress from the substrate fracturing below. He crouched slowly, favoring his left knee. Moss adjusted. The dog shifted his weight forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Darog and to the left, creating a sight line between the old man and the open field. Paulith's scanner registered a micro-shift in the dog's cortisol, not an increase but a redistribution, a sharpening of attention that did not reach the threshold of stress but sat precisely at the line between rest and readiness. When Darog stood, Moss relaxed. The entire sequence had taken 11 seconds. Neither of them had made a sound. "How many verbal commands have you given the dog this morning?" she asked at the field's eastern edge, where the wheat moved in the wind and the conquered staging area was visible below. Darog thought about it. "None. None. He doesn't need them, not for the morning walk. He knows the route. He knows the pace. He knows where I stop and where I check the stalks and where I look at the sky to read the wind. He's been doing this walk with me since he was 6 months old." Paulith lowered her scanner. The display showed data she had been accumulating for the past hour: heart rate, respiration, galvanic response, cortisol metabolites, and a neurological activity map that she had stared at for a full minute without blinking. "Mr. Combe, the neurological sync between you and this animal is, I do not have a professional term for it. The closest analogy in galactic xenofauna literature is pair-bonded Crescent hawkmates, but those are genetic pairs, imprinted from birth through chemical bonding. This is learned. This is 9 years of mutual calibration, day by day, walk by walk, and the result is a behavioral integration I have never documented in any species pair. He's a working dog. That's what they do." "No, Mr. Combe, that is not what they do. What they do is herd. What this dog does is attend to you. The herding instinct is present. I can see it in the eye movements, the positional corrections, the way he circles your left side when you slow down as though nudging a lagging animal back into pace. But the instinct has been redirected. He is not herding sheep. He is herding you. He is monitoring your pace for fatigue, your posture for pain, your attention for lapses. He is managing you the way his species was bred to manage a flock: quietly, constantly, without being asked, and without you needing to know he is doing it." Darog was quiet for a while. The wind moved through the wheat, a long, slow rustle that sounded like breath. "I know," he said. "You know. I've known for years. He started doing it after my wife died. He said this the way he said everything level, factual, a man reporting the weather. I stopped going out to the field for a while, couple of weeks, maybe 3, sat in the kitchen, didn't eat much, didn't sleep much. Didn't see the point if I'm honest. He'd come to the door every morning same time and stand there, not bark, not whine, just stand there and look at me until I got up. He paused. The wind carried wheat dust past them. So I got up, and then I went to the field, and then I went to the field the next day, and the next, because the dog was at the door and the dog expected me to go, and I couldn't look at him standing there and not go. Paulette said nothing. She wrote something on her datapad that took a long time. Her handwriting, Darragh noticed, had changed. The careful clinical characters from her first day of notes had loosened, slowed, become something that looked less like documentation and more like testimony. He herded me back, Darragh said. I know that, I've always known that. He herded me out of grief the way his mother herded sheep out of the high terraces, patient, persistent, never loud, just present every morning at the door. Day 3. The tremor came at night. A 4.8. The barn wall cracked from foundation to eave. A fracture line Darragh could trace in the morning with his finger, the stone and composite separating cleanly the way things separate when the force is deep and unequivocal. A section of roof sheeting tore loose and went sailing into the wheat field with a sound like a sheet of metal being read its last rites. The power cut out. The generator's emergency backup kicked in, held for 30 seconds, and then died with a whine that descended into silence. In the darkness, Darragh found Moss already at the bedroom door, pressed against the frame, waiting. Not panicking, not barking, not scratching at the door or pacing or whining, waiting. The way a partner waits at the door when it is time to leave and the other one is still putting on their shoes. Not yet, Darragh said. Moss stayed at the door. In the morning, Paulette ran a structural assessment on the barn and concluded what Darragh already knew. The building was no longer safe. The farmhouse had cracks in 2 load-bearing walls. The kitchen window he had taped was fully gone now, the frame warped by the tremor's lateral force, the opening covered with a sheet of cargo plastic that billowed in the wind. The grain silo had shifted 2 degrees off vertical. The irrigation pump was offline. The plateau itself had changed. Darragh could see it from the porch. A new fissure running across the southeast corner of his field, 30 meters long, narrow but visible, the soil displaced along its length by 3 centimeters. Mr. Combe, Paulette said. She was standing at the edge of the fissure, scanner in hand, but the scanner was not pointed at the ground. It was pointed at Moss, who was sitting beside the fissure, looking at it with the focused calm of an animal that has identified a change in the terrain and is waiting for instructions. The departure shuttle is in 3 days. I know. The waiver is approved. I will accompany Moss on the shuttle. He will not be separated from you. I have confirmed this with Tessic and with the regional authority. He will ride in the passenger cabin at your side under my continuous monitoring. I know. She waited. He said nothing more. He was standing in the wheat field, looking at the 40 hectares he had planted and tended and argued with and fought for, and the wind was coming from the east the way it always came, and the wheat was golden brown the way it always was at this time of year, and everything was exactly the same except that the ground beneath it was breaking apart and there was nothing his stubbornness could do about it. Stubbornness was good against weather. Stubbornness was good against debt. Stubbornness was good against loneliness and self-pity and the voice that said quit in the dark hours. Stubbornness was not good against geology. Moss stood at his left heel, patient, calm, watching Darragh, the way Darragh watched the field with the steady attention of someone who has no intention of leaving, but who understands that the person they are watching is not ready to leave either. I don't know how to leave, Darragh said. He was not talking to Paulette. He was not talking to Moss. He was not talking to anyone. The words came out the way water comes through a crack in a dam, not because the dam wanted it, But because the pressure had been building for 14 days, and the dam was 63 years old and tired, and the dam's wife was dead, and the dam's neighbors were gone, and the dam's wheat was beautiful and doomed, and the only thing the dam had left that understood any of this without explanation was 22 kilograms of Border Collie at his left heel. I built this. My grandfather started it and my father continued it and I finished it, and I don't know how to be somewhere else. I don't know how to wake up and not walk this field. I don't know how to not see this view. His voice was level. It stayed level the way Tesic's clipboard stayed organized, through an act of will that had nothing to do with how he felt. They're giving me a unit in Varon Basin, 4 rooms, communal agriculture plot, shuttle access to the market. Everything a man could need, and none of it is this. Moss pressed his forehead against Darrog's thigh, the same gesture he had made during the tremor, close, steady, here. The weight of his skull against the old man's leg, the warmth of him through the canvas trousers, the slow exhale that vibrated through his ribcage and into Darrog's bone. Paulith stood 10 meters back. Her scanner was off. Her datapad was in her pocket. She was not observing. She was witnessing something that was not in any behavioral database and did not need to be. The field will not survive the next event cycle, she said quietly. The soil analysis confirms substrate fracturing beneath the root zone. The calcium-heavy layer that supports your grandfather's wheat adaptation is shearing. Even without evacuation, the wheat would not survive another season. I know that too. Then what you are mourning is not the wheat. Darrog looked at her, then he looked at Moss. The dog looked back at him with one brown eye and one blue, and in that look was everything that 9 years of mornings had built: every walk, every heel, every silent adjustment, every time the dog had gone to the door and waited until the man got up, every evening on the porch watching the bronze light, every tremor weathered and every silence shared. No, Darrog said, I'm mourning the version of me that belonged here. Moss leaned into his leg. The weight of him, 22 kilograms, every gram of it exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly where it had always been, steady and warm and unquestioning. Day 1. The shuttle was on the pad. The cargo containers were loaded. The last 3 families on the plateau, the Rennicks, the Codurans, and Darrog, were processing through the Concord's departure checkpoint, a temporary structure erected at the staging area with all the warmth and personality of a customs booth on a way station that processed 100 departures a day and cared about none of them. Tesic was there, clipboard in hand, checking names against manifests, with the methodical precision that had carried him through 14 days of a stubborn farmer's refusal. Paulith was there, scanner running, her waiver credentials visible on her transit badge, her silver fur smooth and her oversized eyes tracking Moss with an expression that had migrated, over the past 5 days, from clinical assessment to something she would later describe in her report as professional regard, which was Drenathi for something much less clinical. A Toreshi cargo supervisor named Dren was directing the loading sequence with 4 arms, his massive frame moving between containers and shuttle bays, with the efficiency of a species that had been lifting heavy things on high-gravity worlds for longer than humans had been walking upright. Darrog stood at the checkpoint with Moss at his left heel. He had his canvas jacket on, the one with the mismatched elbow patches that his wife had sewn and he had never replaced, his boots, a single duffel bag containing what he had decided was worth carrying, a photograph of his wife, his grandfather's seed journal, a collar that had belonged to Moss's mother, and a small jar of Mureth 4 plateau soil, calcium-heavy and stubborn and useless anywhere else. He had left the rest. The house, the barn, the equipment, the 40 years of a life built on stubborn labor and difficult land. He had left the manifest on the kitchen table with the 12th page still blank, because he had never filed the companion animal transfer, and he was not going to. Tesic approached. He looked at Darrog, he looked at Moss, he looked at Paulith. The waiver is in order, Paulith said. Continuous monitoring, my liability. Tessic hesitated. 14 days ago, in the wheat field, he had held his clipboard like the last honest object in the world and told a stubborn old farmer that he could not keep his dog. Now he looked at the clipboard, and then he looked at the dog, and then he did something that surprised Darragh more than any tremor had. He crouched, slowly the way Paulith had done. He extended one scaled hand, palm flat, fingers spread in the Vorathi gesture of open approach, and held it at the level of the dog's nose. Moss looked at the hand, he looked at Darragh, one brown eye, one blue. "Go on," Darragh said. Moss leaned forward and touched his nose to Tessic's fingers. The Vorathi's compound eyes went completely still, no shift, no flicker, no movement at all, and Darragh realized he was watching someone experience, for the first time, what it felt like to be accepted by an animal that did not have to accept him. Tessic remained crouched for 3 full seconds. His breathing was audible. Then he stood, made a single notation on his clipboard, the sound of the stylus precise and deliberate, and said, "Cleared. Board when ready." "What did you write?" Darragh asked. Tessic looked at the clipboard. "I wrote, companion animal status confirmed, waiver accepted, risk assessment negligible." He paused. "And then I wrote a note for the file. Personal observation." "What observation?" "That in 14 days of monitoring the Combe property, including 3 seismic events of increasing magnitude, the Earth Border Collie designated Moss exhibited no aggressive behavior, no startle response, no vocalized distress, and no deviation from its handler's proximity beyond standard working range." He paused again. "And that its resting heart rate, measured by Dr. Paulith's scanner on multiple occasions, was lower than the rate I measured in the sedated transport animals in Cargo Bay 2, and that when I extended my hand, the animal chose to make contact. The animal chose." Darragh said nothing. He picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the shuttle. Moss walked with him, left heel, matching stride. The same walk they had taken every morning for 9 years, except this time, the path led away from the field and up a loading ramp, and into a conquered shuttle's passenger hold, where the seats were bolted to the floor in rows, and the windows showed the plateau from a vantage Darragh had never seen. They sat, Darragh by the window, Moss on the floor beside him, his body pressed against Darragh's leg, his chin on his paws. The Rennick family was across the aisle: Hagen Rennick, his wife Sorrel, and their 2 children, who had grown up on the plateau, knowing Moss the way farm children know a neighbor's working dog. The younger boy, Callum, who was 7 and had not yet learned to be afraid of things the adults feared, slid off his seat and crouched beside Moss without asking permission. He put his small hand on the dog's back. Moss did not flinch, did not shift, did not turn. His tail moved once. Callum's mother started to reach for him, then stopped. Even she could see that the dog was the calmest thing on the shuttle. Behind the Rennicks, 3 Toreshi cargo handlers who had finished their loading shift were strapped into oversized transit seats. One of them, a female with rust-colored plating and the calloused hands of someone who moved heavy objects for a living, was watching Moss with narrowed eyes. Not fear, curiosity. She had loaded 400 cargo containers in the past 2 weeks, and had seen the xenofauna holding facility and the sedated animals inside it, all of them restrained, all of them monitored, all of them exhibiting the elevated biosignatures of organisms under chemical calm. And now she was looking at an unsedated Class 12 companion animal lying on a shuttle floor with a child's hand on its back, and its biosignature, if she could have read it, would have been lower than any of them. Moss's one brown eye and one blue watched the world with steady, focused calm. The shuttle lifted, the plateau dropped away. Darragh saw his wheat field from above for the first time in 40 years, golden brown, wind drippled, perfect and doomed, the most beautiful 40 hectares of stubborn agriculture on a marginal world that was, even now, cracking apart beneath it. He did not look away. He watched until the field was a square, then a stamp, then a thread of gold, then nothing. Paulith, seated across the aisle, was running her scanner in its quiet, continuous capture mode. After several minutes, she leaned forward. "Mr. Combe." "What?" "Your heart rate is elevated, expected given the circumstances, but the dog's is not. It is exactly what I measured on day 5 resting in the shade of your barn." She paused. "It has not changed, not during boarding, not during takeoff, not now. He's a Border Collie. He doesn't worry about things he can't herd." Paulith considered this. "Mr. Combe, may I offer a professional observation?" "You're going to anyway." The dog's behavioral baseline has not shifted because its primary reference point has not shifted. You are its flock. You are its terrain. You are the field it walks every morning and the door it waits beside and the pace it matches step for step. As long as you are present, the dog's environment is stable. She lowered her scanner. "He is not leaving the farm, Mr. Combe. He is not arriving at Varon Basin. He is not in transit. He is simply with you, and that is the only variable he has ever tracked." Darug was quiet, the shuttle hummed, the plateau was gone. Below them, the terrain changed, flatter, greener, the basin opening up ahead like a different country. The prefab structures of Varon Basin visible in the middle distance as a grid of small white squares against the green. He reached down and put his hand on Moss's head. The fur was coarse and warm, silver-threaded at the ears and muzzle, familiar the way a man's own hands are familiar the thing he touched first in the morning and last at night. Moss pressed up into the touch without lifting his head. The tail moved once. The slow, single sweep that was not excitement and not request but acknowledgement. "I am here. You are here. That is enough." "Yeah," Darug said. His voice was rough, not broken, not dramatic. Just rough, the way a voice gets when a man who has been holding something for 14 days lets go of it quietly, without announcement, without making anyone else carry the weight. "I know, boy." The shuttle flew south. Below, the basin spread green and flat and new. Somewhere in it was a unit with 4 rooms and a communal agriculture plot, and a view that was not his view, and a morning that would start without the east wind. But Moss was at his left side, and the dog's heart rate had not changed, and the one brown eye and the one blue were steady. And for the first time in 2 weeks, Darug understood something that Paulith could measure, but only the dog could teach. Home was not a coordinate. Home was not 40 hectares of wheat on a dying plateau. Home was not a cracked farmhouse on calcium-heavy soil, or a barn his grandfather built, or a view of bronze light on grain at sunset. Those things were beautiful. Those things were gone. And the thing that mattered had walked up the shuttle ramp beside him without hesitation, because the thing that mattered had never been confused about where home was. Home was 22 kilograms of Border Collie at his left heel, matching his stride, watching the world on his behalf, patient and calm, and absolutely certain about the only thing that had ever mattered. He closed his eyes. Moss did not move. The shuttle flew south. The wheat field was gone. The dog was not. That was enough.